Good evening, everyone, on this Friday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. God bless you. It's Joe Chafee here on the Joe Chafee Weather Show. You okay? You need to blow your nose or anything? Just checking. So, that's my friend John, who I'm checking in on tonight. So everybody, hope you had a great Friday and getting ready for a good weekend. We are dealing with a lot today. We have not one but two named tropical storms. For the most part, they just really kind of add to the year's statistics. They're not really changing the overall scheme of weather. Both Tropical Storm Olga in the Gulf of Mexico, which developed to the east of a cold front, and a non-tropical low that has moved off the North Texas coast. We're going to show you what it looks like on the surface map. And Tropical Storm Pablo, which formed not too far from the Azores, and that actually is kind of interesting in that when we show you, when you'll see it on the satellite loop, you're going to see it's actually a storm within a storm. You've got this big upper air, cold upper air storm that is spinning out there, and right near the center there seems to be a warm core system that is Pablo. Neither one of these will probably last very long. Certainly Olga may be gone by the 10 o'clock advisory, although when I looked at the loop a little while ago, I still could see some evidence of a low-level circulation that was separate from the frontal boundary. Bottom line with this is that it's not going to change anything with regards to the heavy rains in the Gulf states. They're still getting, they've gotten them, those rains. They're going to get more. And the tropical moisture that is going to be feeding into this low will move through the Tennessee and Ohio Valley and eventually bring rain to the northern mid-Atlantic and the Northeast on Sunday. So we're going to take a look at all of that. We're going to look at the weather for next week because we're still having some model issues here going forward, depending on which one you look at. But I think that we'll probably have another weather event to deal with during the middle part of next week. So let's get started here tonight. And we're going to do, first things first, we are going to bring the window up. And we'll switch over to, we'll start off with with Olga and what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico. First thing I want to show you is, at least from the standpoint of forecasts, we're going to look at some of the rainfall forecasts. And bear in mind that the numbers that you're seeing on this particular map from the Weather Service is in addition to what has already fallen so far today. And in some places it has been substantial, on the order of a couple of inches. So we're looking at an additional 2 to 3 inches in some places along the southern part of Louisiana and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And of course, you've got these higher amounts to the north, which are now getting underway on the order of 3 to even 4 inches, pushing up right along the Mississippi River into southern Missouri, western Kentucky, southern Illinois, and southernmost Indiana. And going forward, through tomorrow and Sunday, we're seeing some pretty decent amounts in northern Alabama, northwestern Georgia. Atlanta, for example, getting right on the edge of about an inch of rain, and then those amounts decrease as you head south and east to the coast. This is taking a track west of the Appalachians, so you're going to see your heaviest rains further to the west. And then eventually, as it starts to redevelop to the east on Sunday on the warm front, we're going to translate at least an inch to an inch and a half of rain across Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, the Hudson Valley, and on up into parts of New England. Also going to see some 1-inch rains pushing up into Michigan, back to about Chicago. The 1-inch line at about St. Louis to just west of Little Rock. And then again, when you get down south, you're looking at rain on top of what's already fallen. So I've got two views to show you here with WPC. Been showing the 7-day rainfall forecast map for a long time, and I thought it was probably good if we bring up also the forecast map for 1 to 3 days so we can see if something's front end loaded versus back end loaded. And this is starting from 8 o'clock tonight through 8 o'clock Monday. So this really takes into account this entire first weather low, this first system, this first low that is coming out of the Gulf of Mexico and then running on up to the northeast. So you see where the additional rains that are going to fall on the order of 3+ inches in that bright red blotch that's in northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, southwestern Missouri, southern in Illinois. And as far as the northeast is concerned, that lighter blue starts off at about 1 inch of rain. So you see where WPC has that 1 inch line running just about along Route 78 in Pennsylvania to about New York City and Long Island, north of there, with a few isolated heavier patches. Again, this is through Monday evening. Now, if we go to the 7-day rainfall amount, you're going to see that there's additional rains being indicated, and this takes us to next Friday night. So this is implying that there is going to be obviously another event sometime for the middle and latter part of next week. And I think the models are kind of zeroing in perhaps on Halloween to be the day where we could wind up seeing another big round of rain. Not sure exactly yet how it's going to evolve. It is going to evolve a cold front swinging eastward. Whether we deal with a low that runs up to the Great Lakes or perhaps something that runs up a little bit further east, I'm not sure about that yet, but it will probably be something that will be substantial in some areas with regards to rainfall. Now, let's look at the surface map tonight off the Texas coast, because you can see what's going on if we with regards to the tropical system. It's on the east side of that cold front, and if you can, I'm not sure if it's tight enough where you can see it, but the temperature dew points and I've gotten a little bit tighter here, but you'll notice that the temperature dew points east of that front in the tropical air are in the 70s, some temperatures further to the east in the low 80s. So clearly the tropical system is where this low-level circulation is, and that small little core of cluster of convection around it is on the east side of that cold front. You jump to the other side, you're seeing northwest winds at 30 knots sustained and probably some gusts up into the 40s, but that's on the backside of the cold front, and you'll notice the temperatures on the other side are in the 60s, dew points in the 50s. You get all along the Texas coast, you're definitely in the drier air. So there are two distinct air masses. There's a non-tropical low analyzed at 5 p.m. in southwest Louisiana, and there you can see where the warm front is, running across southern Louisiana to about New Orleans, and then going north and east to a roughly Biloxi Gulfport, and then continuing on northeastward from there. So the tropical storm sits inside this warm sector. In the next, I would say, 6 hours or so, we probably will see this all merge together as one, and it's going to be very difficult to find the distinction between one and the other. And you'll know it once you start to see the obs on the other side of the low. If you start to see the dew points and temperatures drop, it's telling you that the drier air, or certainly the colder air, is pushing eastward, and that the system is going to lose its tropical characteristics and just become a plain old non-tropical Gulf low. A fairly impressive one, but nonetheless it will no longer be tropical. Meanwhile, up the middle Atlantic states, back up through the northeast, you've got this frontal boundary that's been sitting around here all day. We were fighting clouds in and out all day, high pressure on either side. It's a pretty weak pressure pattern that we have here, because we're just basically waiting for that low to come out of the Gulf. And in the meantime, you've got the next upper trough that's about to drop down into the northern plains and northern Rockies. And ahead of it now, temperatures have actually climbed up into the 60s and even the 70s in parts of Montana and into the Dakotas. You're seeing that warmer air. This will soon be replaced by another one of these colder pushes coming down from Canada that will move down the Rockies and might even bring some snow back into Wyoming and parts of Colorado and Montana after this warm-up and the trough moves on through. So pretty busy here. A lot of different types of seasons are going on all across the United States when you look at the weather scheme here. So let's look at Olga. And I was able to, just about a couple hours ago, the Hurricane Center put up a floater that is available, and right in the middle of the picture is where the center is. And if you look carefully, you don't even have to look that carefully, you can actually see the circulation, the low-level center that is just spinning away, and it's still evident there on the last frame. So at least as of 8 o'clock Eastern time, I think this is still a tropical storm. And of course, you also can see the dry air coming down through South Texas and offshore, off the Texas coast. So that's on the other side. This is, again, you're going to see eventually this will just merge into one. At a certain point, you're not going to be able to make that distinction. You're not going to be able to see that low-level swirl that is so evident here on this tight satellite loop. Then here's the Hurricane Center's forecast from 4 p.m., and they were forecasting this to become a non-tropical system sometime later this evening or during the first part of tonight. But the basic track of the post-tropical low, following the models, taking it up through Louisiana to about Memphis by Saturday afternoon, to near Indianapolis by 1 a.m. Sunday, and then on up in northeastern parts of Lake Huron by 1 p.m. Sunday. At this point, this low is going to be weakening, and we're going to see it start to redevelop at the point of occlusion. That's something that we've seen happen a few times lately, and we're going to see it happen again with this one. So the wide satellite loop tonight, the dry air back through the plains and Rockies, and then of course you see the dropping trough that's coming in from the northwest out of Canada and dropping into the northernmost Rockies. And of course, now you have the Gulf system and the non-tropical system. If you look closely, the clouds back through Oklahoma and northeast Texas that's the short wave, that's the upper low that is moving east. And then of course you can see on this wider view, you've got the low-level circulation that is evident with Olga and all the clouds that are streaming up northeastward. The stalled frontal boundary, where you have those brighter white clouds, that's right along where the frontal boundary is, and you had some thin spots in there, as we said earlier today. But there's no real precip going on with all of this, so that's a good thing. It's actually not that far away, though. When you look at the radar tonight, you've got rain already all the way into West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, moving into western North Carolina. The rain area is pretty impressive, pretty solid shield. We also, by the way, have some showers streaking across upstate New York and in through Vermont and New Hampshire, again, north of that weak boundary that we saw. And the rains are particularly heavy in western Alabama, eastern Mississippi, down into southeast Louisiana, getting that tropical flow. And then you also can see the counterclockwise rotation of the echoes back through Oklahoma and in a small portion of northern Texas there. They're turning counterclockwise. So it's very, very interesting when you have all these different things going on with regards to a tropical system and interacting with a non-tropical system. There's always the chance, by the way, that we could see, as this becomes post-tropical, that we could wind up with a slightly deeper surface low that moves northward. It'll be non-tropical in nature. The weather outcomes are going to be the same. There will be some gusty winds along the Louisiana coast and maybe a bit inland as the low moves northward. There'll be a little bit of a pressure gradient there, and that low will continue to move to the northeast. So we'll see how this all plays out during the overnight. I wouldn't be shocked if we wind up with a deeper low than what the models indicate, even though it won't necessarily be a tropical one. Some scattered showers across the state of Florida, also some scattered showers in southeastern Georgia. And then as we go out to the west, it's pretty quiet throughout much of the western part of the U.S. and back over through California. You may have seen in the news there have been some wildfire issues continue there with PG&E having to shut power down to, I believe it was 150,000 homes, and maybe going to increase that further to deal with this wildfire situation. And one of the interesting stories I read today on CNBC's website was the fact that there's a company that makes generators, and they apparently never anticipated a situation where we would have the power companies literally shutting power down. So their business has just taken off. I think the company's stock is up like 85 or 90% this year. I guess it's one of those the law of unintended consequences. But the wildfire issues, it's still going to be dry in California, and the winds may actually pick up a bit over the weekend. Now, I just want to really quick, before we go to the models, let's just look at Tropical Storm Pablo because of the the tropical system that's kind of inside this broad upper low. I've got the floater image up, so this is a very, very tight view. The latitude longitude lines, Pablo is sitting between 30. So the longitude line that's to the far left is 40 degrees west, and then you've got 35 degrees west, 30 degrees west, and 25 degrees west. And then, of course, the first latitude line in the bottom, near the bottom, okay, not quite to the bottom, but that first one that's visible there, that is 30 degrees north, and then you've got 35. That's the other line that you see, and then the next line goes up to 40, and then you're off the screen. So the tropical system, you see all these little clusters that there's a curvature to it, so that's the tropical system. It's very, very small. When you take a look at this on the wider view, which I have somewhere here, what did I do with it? Is this it? Yep, there it is. So if you look toward the upper right, you can see the very large circle. It's almost off the screen, but if you look toward the upper right, you can see and on your view, I'm just going to move. It's more toward the center, so center right. You can actually see the really large upper air cyclonic circulation of this big upper air storm that's out there, and then right near the center, you've got this sort of warm core storm that's embedded in it. This is not unusual, by the way. It's happened. It happens from time to time. When it happens, it's usually in the late season, like where we are now, the late part of the hurricane season, and it usually happens with these storms out in the North Atlantic, in the central North Atlantic. There's still time that you could still wind up with another one between now and the official end of hurricane season. But Pablo is out there, and it is, just in case, again, it's at 35,832.2, and that's as of the advisory at 5 p.m. I don't believe they don't have any tropical storm warnings up for the Azores. It is located 325 miles west-southwest of the Azores, and it's moving east-southeast at about 10 miles an hour, and eventually forecast to turn to the northeast, and then it'll just go and goodbye. So kind of odd today that we started the day with no tropical storms, anticipating that maybe one could happen, and we wound up with that system popping up in the Atlantic, and suddenly we've got two of them. All right, so let's get to the models here with what we expect to happen as we go through the rest of tonight and head into the weekend. So our vigorous upper low is quite obvious here. We have it sitting right into northeast Texas. And, of course, we've got what is Olga that is moving fairly quickly toward the Louisiana coast. And, again, this is just going to become this non-tropical storm that is going to lift up to the northeast. The upper feature, the short wave, is going to run up toward Chicago. And in the meantime, you've got the next shortwave trough dropping down into the plains, this one going northeastward toward the lakes. It's very interesting how the models initially were trying to take this way, and then it went this way, and now it's gone about as far left as you can get it. Getting a little bit of influence here by this trough digging perhaps a little faster and a little deeper. I didn't think that was possible, but with weather, you always learn. You learn that you can be humbled and you can be wrong. And that lifts up to the northeast, and now this next trough drops in. The GFS has been trying to just kind of move this trough and overwhelm cold air into the eastern United States. We talked about this yesterday and the day before. This model loves to do that, and it does it many times in error. And I think this may be, again, one of those times. We were watching to see how things were going to evolve, and I really think now we can pretty make the call here that the GFS is not going to be correct in trying to overwhelm cold air into the eastern part of the United States. We're going to have to wait for another shortwave trough that's going to drop down from the north to swing around. So in the meantime, as we move into early next week, at least through Tuesday, we're going to have this west-southwest flow. We have an upper high off the Florida coast with a ridge that's building up. So it's going to take some time. This ridge is going to have to weaken, and this whole trough is going to try to bodily swing eastward. And it may be along about Thursday that we could wind up seeing some kind of cold front moving toward the east coast, maybe a deepening low that is running along that front that heads up toward the northeast. Still, that part of it I'm not 100% sure of yet in terms of how it's going to play. And then after that short wave lifts up and around, you've got a second one behind it. So this would certainly argue that there will be some chillier air coming in for the weekend, for next weekend. And I think the question you have to ask is, if there's going to be another short wave that drops southward here, is there going to be room for perhaps another storm system to impact the eastern part of the United States later next weekend or early next week? I would watch this closely in the next couple of days to see how that plays out, and I certainly would not rule out the possibility that there could be something else of consequence for next weekend and the early part of the following week. So the European continues to show kind of a whole slightly different view of all of this, because the European is lined up pretty much the same when it comes to the lead shortwave, which I'm going to now draw for you. So you've got tonight's short upper low and shortwave that's going to run up toward the Great Lakes. There's your trough that is dropping down into the northern plains. Let me center that for you just a little bit better. And then as we go forward, we'll watch the trough in the plains drop down. The system now lifting to the Great Lakes just goes goodbye. And at least up until Monday, the GFS and the European are kind of the same. And then after that, they go their different routes. The first thing is of importance is that the European continues to maintain a rather strong upper high off the Florida coast with some semblance of a ridge here along the east coast. A fairly strong southwest flow going into the lake. So it really wants to keep trying to drop a cutoff low down in the southwest, and that forces that ridge to come up in the eastern part of the United States. It's an equal and opposite reaction. When you get a deep trough in one spot, you're going to have a compensating strong ridge in another. And in the north, the northern part of the jet stream just kind of moves along here to the east as a separate entity. And that's already now through New England, and the European then takes that southern energy out and swings it up toward the Great Lakes late next week. So this would imply that you would probably have a strong storm heading up to the Great Lakes on Thursday night, Friday of next week, and then turning chilly for next weekend into the early part of the following week. I'm not 100% sold on this either, because the model's been trying to drop something in the southwest for days now, and I'm just not convinced. The past model runs were kind of focusing on this first short wave dropping down and cutting off in the southwest. Now that appears not to be happening, and now it wants to do it with this second one that drops down. So I just, the thing about these systems cutting off in the southwest like that is, and I suppose that there has to be the first one that does it. Models like to show this from time to time, and they're very overzealous, and they don't wind up happening. So this is one of those situations where I think you really have to prove it to me. Both models, to me, at this point, leave a lot to be desired in terms of trying to get a good handle on where we're going to be going with regards to the weather for later next week in the longer term. So let's go back to the surface map here, and I'll bring up the GFS model, and we'll take a look at what's happening for the next few days. So here's your Gulf low, and by the way, if you look closely, I'm using the full U.S. view. That's a tight little low that comes in along the Gulf Coast. Hold on, right in here. So this is Olga / becoming post-tropical low that is moving northeastward. The rain shield on the GFS, to me, I think probably matches closest to reality as far as what the actual U.S. radar is showing. So here is this is supposed to be for 8 p.m. so 30 minutes ago, and I'll bring up the current radar, and I think they match up pretty well. If you want my opinion, they do match up fairly well in terms of getting the precip shield here on the. In fact, the GFS actually has that precip well up into West Virginia, much like the radar has. It does that streak across upstate New York, and that matches up pretty well. And it also has that precip back through Oklahoma with the upper low. So tomorrow, high pressure builds in. There's going to be a bit of an onshore flow. I think the precip that you see here on the radar that's through Pennsylvania is mostly aloft. You get into western Pennsylvania, then you start seeing the stuff that reaches the ground. By this time, the low runs up through northern Mississippi to western Kentucky, and looks like it's heading right for or just east of Chicago. And there's that east-west arc of heavy rain to the north of the low that runs up through northern Indiana, northern Illinois, northern Ohio, and then eventually pushes into Michigan and Wisconsin. In the meantime, as this upper trough drops down into the plains, you've got this area of snow dropping down through Montana and Wyoming, and that's going to shoot out to the east because there's a lead shortwave that runs up toward the western lakes with all of this. And that takes that little area of light snow across South Dakota and into Minnesota, and then on up into Canada from there. You're left with another low down in Colorado, New Mexico, right on the border, with a little area of snow there for Sunday night into Monday, before that gets kicked out to the northeast as we get to Monday night and Tuesday. The GFS does have, and again, the European to a certain extent does have a bit of a boundary here, another front that is coming into the east. There you go. Up. Hang on, folks. Got to get a color here that you can see. I think really red does work best. But there's your, another little frontal boundary here pushing to the east. It's weak, but behind it, you've got all this really cold air that is dropping southeastward with that high you see, this 1042 high in western Canada. And now the GFS, because it likes to bring that next shortwave out faster, starts to bring energy down into Colorado and Kansas and into the lower Mississippi Valley. And here comes a low for Wednesday night, Thursday. So for Halloween, the GFS is suggesting for Halloween, we're going to see a low running up the west side of the Appalachians and heading up the St. Lawrence Valley as a pretty wrapped up system. I look at this and I think, okay, I understand how it can happen, but I by no means am going to put it in the bank at this point. And if we look at the European surface, what little we can see of it, here we go. So let's bring that up. And I'll go backwards. The European, again, having a later solution with what's coming out of the west, it brings in. So here's our first low for Sunday and Monday. It's about the same. So here's your low for Saturday in southern Mississippi, a 997 low, not too shabby. Runs up by Sunday morning in north of Detroit, well north of Detroit, and moving northeastward. But you're getting this pinched warm front in the east, so that'll cause some redevelopment, and then that's gone and goodbye. And now we have the second weak front moving through the Great Lakes. That's that short wave I showed you that runs up to the lakes Monday night to Tuesday. So that brings a slightly cooler air mass into the east, but you start to see the lower pressures down through Texas. A low comes out of the Gulf states on Thursday, centered near Little Rock, Arkansas. You can take a look at where these isobars, by the way, are all pointed at, and they're set up and pointed up through the Ohio Valley and on up into central New England. So you've got a low track that's going to probably want to do something like this, running up toward the Great Lakes, which the European does. And once again, it's got a wrapped up low, but today it's Friday morning sitting near Detroit with a trailing cold front, and you've got a warm front that is running up to about southeastern New England. Behind it, some pretty chilly air, but again, the European would suggest that we're going to have to wait until after Friday, that it won't be until next weekend that we get into chilly air for Saturday and Sunday, and probably into the following Monday. So still a lot to resolve after we deal with this this first weather system. Hang on one second, folks. I'm going to come back to the chat board here in just a moment. Let me turn this off, which I just did. All right, so it's a Friday night. I don't want to go, Friday night live streams, I try to keep them a little shorter because usually this is a night where everybody's going out. So hang on one second. All right, so I'm back on the chat board with everybody. Got a nice little crowd tonight, so it's good to see everybody here. Had to do a bit of a late start. By the way, thanks to Paul Roman and Scott Briller for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. Thanks very much. It's always good to see Chris Alley on board. Marble Races. It's weird how two tropical storms seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Well, I would say Marble. Well, the one in the Gulf of Mexico, we've been talking about the possibility the last couple of days, so I'm not too shocked about that one. The one in the Atlantic was a bit of a shocker because, you know what, I don't think anybody was really paying too close attention. I did notice yesterday on the satellite loop the big upper low, but you don't usually anticipate tropical storms to form inside those upper lows, which is kind of what you have here. Again, not unusual, does happen from time to time, usually late season storms. But now we're at the letter P, so that gives us, what is that? J is 10, K, L, M, N, O. That's 16 named storms this season. And the Hurricane Center's, the forecast was for, I think it was anywhere from 12 to 17. So it looks like we're finishing right at the high end. And we still probably have time for one more to pop up. But if they're going to pop up now, they're going to be like what you're seeing. You know, this odd situation in the Gulf of Mexico, this sort of odd situation that you see out in the Atlantic. And Peter Bicker, as we have been pointing out, and you're bringing it up again, and you're pointing it out that we would not believe any winter forecasts you're hearing at this time because they are wrong with those seasonal forecasts all the time. And there's no point to it at the end of the day. The winter will evolve into whatever the winter will evolve into. I would just say this. Let's look at what we have and what we don't have, okay? What we don't seem to have, which we had for a good part of last winter, if you remember, was the screaming fire hose jet that ran across the Pacific. We don't seem to have that. We also lately have been seeing a busier Atlantic. If you think back to last year, last winter, we went through a very long stretch there where there was hardly any storms out in the Atlantic, and that was important because when we were dealing with these lows that were coming off the southeast coast, without having a traffic buildup out in the Atlantic, these storms just flew out to the northeast and never bothered anybody. You need something out there to kind of force these storms to climb further north to look for an exit way. And we have seen, at least in the last few weeks, the tendencies for lows to develop along or just offshore, or even further offshore. But at least there's traffic out there, and I think that is also different. I just would also, I'm just trying to think back to last fall. You try to gain clues from the fall as far as how it's going to be at the start of the winter. I don't. Everything else to me is kind of in a vague place. So I'll take that, actually. I'd rather be in a definitive vague place than to be in something definitive. And here's another thing that's different, too. We have no El Nino. We have no La Nina. We are neutral from that standpoint. So that is that's another thing that is different. So perhaps that will be, that's going to set us up with some opportunities at some point. We'll see. We're just going to have to take it. We'll have to just take it a day at a time with regards to how the weather evolves through the month of November and see where it takes us. What else can we do? We got to wait anyway. No forgiveness needed there, Javon Perry. You say this is kind of BS, but POW Ponder on Weather was throwing out his snow gauge predictions for everyone, saying Boston and me 70 plus inches. Okay, well, you know what? Hold on to that and let's come back in March and see where we are. That's all I'll say about that. And I would just ask, because I'm not too familiar with it, but the last 5 or 6 years, was it the cold and snowy repetitive forecast for every year? I don't know that it was. I'm just asking the question, because that's really what you get with these wintertime forecasts. No one's going to click on a wintertime forecast that's posted that says that the winter is going to be basically a non-event, at least for the Northeast. There seems to be some obsession with snow in the I-95 corridor. I don't know why that is, particularly because at least maybe down in Washington, D.C. to a certain extent, in Baltimore, snow there is not something that happens. I mean, you get some every winter, but, Philadelphia, you get a bit more. But certainly no excuse for the folks around New York City. Average snowfall is about 30 inches. You go a handful of miles north and west, or north or northeast of New York City or on Long Island, and the snowfall averages are, somewhere between 35 and even 40 inches or more. It's wintertime. It snows. Why there should be this obsession about it is beyond me. But there is. Outside of the snow weenies, who, as I've said many times, feel as if it should be snowing from November 1st on. And in fact, November 1st coming up, I'm going to be curious. I'm waiting for people to come on during the month of November and proclaim that winter is over with before it even started, because they haven't had their first burial yet, or maybe the first lake effect snow event hasn't happened. I'm just waiting to see those posts show up. Yes, Timothy, I got my Giants. Not only do I have my Giants shirt on, my Giants sweatshirt on, but I have also, hang on, get ready for it. But underneath, I have my Giants, what is this? The 2012, 2007. My 2007 championship shirt. This shirt is 12 years old, and it's still going. It's faded. It's also a bit of a Magic shirt, but it's not in the Magic in a good way, because every time the Giants lose, the shirt fades a little bit more. And if they keep on losing over the next couple of years, I think it may just fade to where you won't be able to see much of anything at all. And they're playing. Are they playing this week? They already had their bye week, did they not? And I think the Jets had their bye week too. So they'll whoever they play, I'll watch, and we'll see. Javon Perry, can you please think about visiting your library in Andover? Is Andover, Massachusetts too far for me? Well, I need something that's like reasonably close, but thank you for at least reminding me about this. I will be at the Bayonne Library in Bayonne, New Jersey on Wednesday, November the 20th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. So mark that down on your calendars. Wednesday, November 20th, the Bayonne Library in Bayonne, New Jersey. So if you are in New Jersey, here is your chance. Be sure to come out. It's the only Jersey library appearance I have scheduled for the rest of this calendar year. And in fact, that's the only library appearance that I have scheduled anywhere for the rest of this calendar year. So I'll keep reminding you on the live streams over the next couple of weeks, and I'll be probably putting a few posts on my social media, on my Facebook page, and on my website about it. But write it down if you're in New Jersey. Wednesday, November 20th, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, the Bayonne Library in Bayonne, New Jersey. Alfred Phillips, who watches every night from the North Slope in Wainwright, Alaska, or most every night, 14 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill of -2. Nice, but hardly any snow. And you really don't get too, especially once the ocean freezes there, once the Arctic freezes, you really don't get a whole lot of snow. Today, Mike Azera reminds us that we had a really big East Coast storm that resembled a hurricane back in 1980. And I know we're coming up to the 7th anniversary of Sandy because I've seen a lot of posts about it. People, weather geeks posting about it all over social media. I don't know why the 7th anniversary is so special, but nonetheless, it is an anniversary, and it was kind of interesting to see some of the forecast maps. It brought back to memory the days before, looking at the models and looking at Hurricane Center's forecast and everything else. It was quite an interesting time that weekend before, and dealing with all the changes that were happening, and ultimately what wound up happening with regards to Sandy making landfall back in the was it the 28th or 9th, whatever the actual date was. But that was some ride that night with listening to my house moan. Sounded like it was going to break at some point, but it held up pretty well, thankfully. All right, folks, coming up on 8:45 on a Friday night. Get out of here. Time to go have a good time. Enjoy your Friday night, and we'll probably see you at some point over the weekend. I'll see about tomorrow. Certainly we'll have a Weather in 5 tomorrow morning, and we'll have a Weather in 5 on Sunday morning. If I don't do a live stream, I may just tape a short video for tomorrow evening and post it up. I'll let you know. Sometimes I do need a break from this stuff. At least one day during the week where I take a breather. So look for latest posts, of course, on my website, meteorologistjoechafee.com. Angry Ben does nycweathernow.com. He also has the app, The Angry Weatherman, which you can download from Google Play. If you have an Android device, not yet available for iPhones, you can have my app for free, the Meteorologist Joe Chafee app, for either Android or iPhone. So download it if you haven't downloaded it already. Here is your opportunity to join the rest of the weather world. Well, not quite the whole weather world, but, well, maybe one day. But go ahead and download it. It's absolutely free. And that's pretty much it. So have a great night, and we'll see you at some point over the weekend. Good night, everyone.